I honestly thought the worst thing that could happen that night was a passive-aggressive noise complaint or a snarky message in the HOA group chat. I was wrong. What actually happened turned my quiet garage get-together into a full-blown police response with flashing lights, shouted commands, and my HOA board member filming my driveway like she was documenting a crime scene. I was standing there with a paper plate in my hand when Melissa Crane, the woman who treats HOA rules like federal law, marched up my driveway and announced she was calling 911. Not because we were loud, not because anyone was blocking the street. She told dispatch we were armed and dangerous. My stomach dropped instantly. Because the men she was pointing her phone at, the ones she was smiling while recording for the HOA group chat, were not criminals. They were off-duty police officers. Friends my brother had invited without warning me. And in one reckless moment, she had created a situation that could have ended very badly for everyone on that street, including herself. As sirens echoed closer, I realized this had never been about rules or safety. It was about power. And for the first time, she had pushed it too far, in front of witnesses she could not intimidate. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Before that night, I was the kind of homeowner every HOA claims it wants. My name is Evan Miller, and I bought my place in Willow Ridge Estates because I believed the promise on the brochure: quiet streets, friendly neighbors, order, stability. The kind of place where you could come home after work, shut the door, and not feel like the world was watching you. I learned pretty quickly that Willow Ridge didn't just like order, it worshipped it. Every blade of grass had an opinion, trash cans had a strict bedtime. Decorations were measured, cataloged, and quietly photographed if they stayed out a minute too long. The HOA newsletter came out every month, and instead of community updates, it read like a list of public scoldings. Someone parked half an inch over the line. Someone else had a wreath that was seasonally inappropriate. And God help you if your garage door stayed open longer than the invisible grace period nobody could ever define. I stayed out of all of it. That was my strategy. I waved, smiled, complied, and kept my head down. I never argued. Never sent angry emails. Never posted in the group chat. I'd lived there for years without a single fine or warning, and I wore that like armor. I believed that if I followed the rules closely enough, I'd be left alone. That belief mattered to me more than I realized. My younger brother Ryan was coming back to town for the first time in a long while. Life had taken him in a different direction, and we hadn't spent real time together in years. I wanted one evening that felt normal. No pressure, no HOA tension. Just family, food, and catching up like we used to before adulthood made everything complicated. My cousin Derek Holt helped sell the idea. Nothing big, he said, just the garage. Folding chairs, chill music. We clean up after, done before 10. It sounded harmless because it was harmless. I prepared like I was hosting an inspection. I swept the garage until the concrete looked new. I rolled the cars out neatly. I set up folding chairs in clean rows, hung a string of cheap lights for warmth, and put a cooler by the side door with sodas and a few beers. The grill stayed controlled. No one got drunk. The garage door stayed halfway open for airflow because it was warm, not because we were trying to make a statement. It felt good. For the first time in a long time, my house felt like my house. Ryan arrived smiling, relaxed, like the weight he usually carried had been set down somewhere else. He brought a few friends he called training buddies. He was vague about it, and I didn't push. Derek showed up with food and jokes. Music played quietly. Laughter bounced off the garage walls. It was exactly the night I'd hoped for. And then there was Melissa Crane. You never had to introduce her in Willow Ridge. Everyone knew her. She was on the HOA board and treated that title like a badge, always holding her phone, always filming, always talking about safety, in a tone that felt more like a threat than concern. She'd recorded neighbors over trash cans. She'd posted photos of cars with captions like, "Is this acceptable now?" She once lectured an elderly couple about their curtains being too dark and unwelcoming. Nothing ever happened to her. No pushback, no consequences. People just complied because it was easier. I'd crossed paths with her before, but only in passing. Polite nods, short conversations. I thought that was enough. I thought staying invisible kept you safe. That night, as laughter filled my garage, and I looked around at my family sitting comfortably in folding chairs, I honestly believed I had finally done everything right. I had followed the rules. I had kept it reasonable. I had respected the neighborhood. I remember standing there with a drink in my hand, watching Ryan laugh, and thinking how rare that felt. I didn't know yet that the same neighborhood I'd worked so hard to appease was already watching, and that the rules I thought protected me were about to be used as a weapon. I was still calm, still hopeful, still convinced that being careful was enough. That belief didn't survive the night. People didn't all show up at once. They filtered in slowly, the way you want guests to arrive when you're trying not to draw attention. A knock here, a friendly wave there, shoes by the door, plates filling up with food. The garage settled into an easy rhythm, and with every new face, my shoulders loosened a little more. Ryan showed up with a few of the friends he'd mentioned earlier, the ones he vaguely called training buddies. I didn't press him on it at first. They were polite, introduced themselves, and immediately started helping without being asked. One guy grabbed extra chairs. Another asked where to put the drinks. Nothing about them screamed trouble, but something about them felt different. It was subtle. The way they stood, the way they looked around without staring. Relaxed but alert, like they were present in the moment while still aware of everything else happening around them. They laughed easily, joined conversations, and blended in, but I kept catching myself noticing how controlled their movements were. No slouching. No careless gestures. Even when they leaned against the wall, it felt intentional. One of them was a tall guy with a calm smile who introduced himself as Daniel Brooks. He shook my hand firmly and thanked me for hosting like it actually meant something to him. Another was Hannah Reyes, who had an easy laugh but sharp eyes that missed nothing. The third was Mark Liu, quieter than the others, friendly but observant, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. Derek noticed it too. At one point, he leaned over and muttered, "Why do your brother's friends look like they professionally prevent chaos?" I laughed, but the comment stuck with me. Still, the night felt good. The grill sizzled softly. Music played low enough that you could still hear conversation. Ryan and Derek started roasting each other over old stories. Someone brought out dessert. For the first time since buying that house, I wasn't thinking about rules or regulations or whether something looked acceptable from the street. I lowered my guard. That's when I saw her. Melissa Crane didn't walk up like a neighbor dropping by to say hello. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed tight, posture rigid, eyes fixed straight into the garage. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stood there like she was assessing a crime scene. The laughter inside the garage continued for a few seconds before I noticed the shift in energy. Conversations dipped slightly, the way they do when someone unwelcome enters your peripheral vision. I set my drink down and stepped outside, trying to keep things friendly. "Hey, Melissa," I said, "everything okay?" She didn't answer the question. Her eyes moved past me, scanning the chairs, the cooler, the people. "Do you have a permit for this gathering?" she asked. I blinked. "A permit?" "It's just family and friends." She pointed at the garage door. "It's open." That makes it visible. Visible gatherings fall under community standards. I explained calmly that we weren't loud, we weren't blocking anything, and we planned to wrap up early. I even mentioned the door was open for airflow because of the heat. I thought reason would work. It didn't. "How many people are here?" she demanded. I shrugged. "A few." Her eyes landed on the cooler. "Is there alcohol in that?" Yes, I said honestly. A few beers. A few beers. Nothing excessive. She sighed loudly, like I was exhausting her. This looks like a violation, she said. And it looks unsafe. Unsafe. That word again. The one she always used when she wanted leverage. I kept my voice steady. We're not bothering anyone. If there's an issue, we can talk about it. She tilted her head and smiled thinly. I don't think talking is going to fix this. She stepped back, already pulling her phone from her pocket. That's when something inside me tightened. I watched her thumb move across the screen, and for the first time all night, I felt genuine dread, not annoyance. Not frustration, real, cold unease. Inside the garage, laughter continued, but it sounded distant now, like it was happening in another place entirely. Melissa turned slightly, angling her phone toward the garage and started recording. I heard her mutter something about documenting and for the record. She didn't look at me anymore. She was already building a story. I went back inside, trying to keep my face neutral, but Daniel Brooks glanced up and met my eyes. He followed my gaze to the driveway and then quietly said, "She filming?" I nodded. The way the mood changed was instant and silent. Music stopped. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Not panic. Awareness. Hannah straightened subtly. Mark shifted his stance. It was like a switch flip that I hadn't known existed. Outside, Melissa turned away, phone still in hand, walking down the driveway while tapping the screen like she was dialing a number she knew by heart. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Something was about to happen. And for the first time since buying that house, I knew being careful wasn't going to save me. Melissa didn't even pretend to be discreet anymore. She stood across the street with her phone held up at eye level, slowly panning across my open garage like she was filming evidence for a documentary. I could hear her voice now, loud enough that it carried across the quiet road. "This is an unsafe gathering," she said clearly, narrating into her phone. Multiple men loitering, alcohol present. Garage door wide open, suspicious behavior. Suspicious. That word again. I walked back out, keeping my hands visible, my voice calm, even though my pulse was pounding in my ears. "Melissa," I said, forcing politeness, "you can stop recording. This is private property." She glanced at me, smirked, and tilted the phone slightly so my face was in frame. "I'm documenting for safety reasons," she replied. "If you don't like it, maybe you shouldn't be violating HOA standards." "We're not violating anything," I said. "It's family and friends. We're being respectful." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that wasn't amused at all. "That's not how enforcement works," she said. "You don't get to decide what's acceptable." "I do." That sentence landed heavier than it should have, not because it was true, but because she believed it. I tried one last time. "Calling anyone over this is unnecessary." Her smile widened. "Too late." She turned away from me, phone still up, and spoke clearly into it again. "Yes, I'm at Willow Ridge Estates. I feel unsafe." Inside the garage, everything had gone quiet. Daniel Brooks stepped closer to me, his voice low and controlled. "She's filming and calling someone," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Music was turned off without discussion. Drinks were set down. Chairs were nudged back just enough to create space. No one panicked. No one raised their voice. But the relaxed warmth from earlier evaporated, replaced by something colder and sharper. Ryan looked at me, guilt written all over his face. "Evan," he said quietly, "I should have told you earlier." "Told me what?" I asked, already bracing myself. He took a breath. "Most of the people here, they're cops. Off duty." For a moment, I just stared at him. Everything clicked at once. The posture, the awareness, the way they'd gone silent in unison, the way Daniel and Hannah had instantly assessed the situation without a word. Relief hit first, fast and intense. These weren't reckless people. These were trained professionals. Then the dread followed, heavier than before, because I knew enough to understand what Melissa was doing. She wasn't calling the HOA hotline. She wasn't filing a complaint. She was escalating this to emergency services, and she was building a narrative while she did it. Outside, her voice rose again. "I believe there may be weapons involved," she said into the phone. "I can't see clearly, but the behavior is aggressive." Aggressive. We had been laughing 5 minutes earlier. Daniel's jaw tightened. Hannah's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in concern. "That's bad," Mark said quietly. My mouth went dry. A false report like that wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. People had been hurt because of calls like this, sometimes worse. "Phones away," Daniel said calmly. "Everyone keep hands visible." No sudden movements. No one questioned him. No one argued. It was like watching a drill executed perfectly. In seconds, everyone complied. I stepped back outside, heart racing, as Melissa ended her call. She looked pleased, almost excited. When she saw me, she lifted the phone again and aimed it straight at my chest. "They're on their way," she said. I told them everything. "What exactly did you tell them?" I asked. She shrugged. "That I was afraid. That there were too many men. That something felt off." She leaned in slightly. "If you weren't doing anything wrong, you wouldn't be nervous." Before I could respond, a sound rolled through the neighborhood that made my stomach twist. Sirens. Not one. Multiple. Still distant, but closing fast. The kind of sound that carries intent with it. Melissa crossed her arms and stayed right where she was, phone still recording, chin lifted like she was waiting for applause. Behind me, inside my garage, everyone stood quietly, hands visible, faces calm but serious. I realized then how surreal it must look from the outside. A silent garage. A group of men standing still. A neighbor filming and claiming danger. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about survival. I felt anger then, sharp and focused. Not at the officers, not at Ryan. At her. At the reckless confidence she had while playing with a system that could destroy lives in seconds. The sirens grew louder, echoing off identical houses and manicured lawns. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on. Curtains moved. Melissa didn't stop filming. And standing there, listening to emergency vehicles rush toward my home, I understood something clearly for the first time. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was gambling with it. No one had to say much after the sirens started closing in. Whatever casual energy was left vanished, replaced by something quiet and deliberate. Daniel Brooks didn't raise his voice or act like he was in charge, but somehow everyone followed him anyway. Phones disappeared into pockets. Drinks were set down. Hands stayed visible. People spaced themselves out just enough so nothing could be misread from the street. There was no panic. That was the strangest part. Just calm compliance, like everyone understood how fragile the next few minutes were. "Let's not give anyone a reason to misinterpret anything," Daniel said evenly. I nodded, even though my chest felt tight. My mind kept looping on one thought: this should not be happening. We were standing in a suburban garage with folding chairs and leftover food, not in the middle of some dangerous situation. But perception mattered more than reality now, and Melissa had already decided what story she wanted told. She made sure everyone heard her. Standing across the street, phone still raised, she spoke loudly enough to carry. "I called 911 because I felt threatened," she announced. "There are men watching the street. I believe there may be weapons." Weapons. The word hit like a punch. "That's a lie," I said before I could stop myself. She turned her camera toward me instantly. "That's my experience," she replied smugly. "You don't get to tell me how I feel." Behind me, I could feel the tension ripple through the garage, controlled but real. Hannah Reyes shifted slightly, eyes locked on Melissa now. Mark Lou exhaled slowly through his nose. No one moved their hands. I realized then that staying inside wasn't going to help. If officers came in hot and saw a group of silent men standing in a garage, Melissa's narrative would win by default. Someone needed to meet them first. Someone who looked harmless. Someone who looked like a homeowner, not a threat. "I'm going out front," I said quietly. Daniel gave a small nod. "We'll stay right here." I walked toward the driveway, hands visible, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sirens were close now. Too close. Flashing lights reflected off the glossy paint of parked cars as the first patrol vehicle turned onto our street. It didn't roll in slowly, it came in fast. Another followed, then another. Tires crunched against the curb, doors opened. Radios crackled. Officers stepped out with purpose, scanning immediately, hands near their belts. This was not a casual response. I raised my hand slightly as I stepped forward. "I'm the homeowner," I called out. "There's no emergency here." One officer looked at me sharply. "Sir, step back and keep your hands where we can see them." I did exactly that, no arguing. No sudden movements. Everything Daniel had warned us about ran through my head. Melissa rushed forward, inserting herself right between me and the officers. "I made the call," she said proudly. I feared for my safety. There are too many men in that garage, and they shut everything down when I started filming. She gestured wildly toward my house, phone still recording. "That behavior is suspicious." The officers glanced past me, toward the garage. From the street, it probably looked eerie. A half-open door, no music. People standing still. Exactly how she wanted it to look. "I'm just having family and friends over," I said carefully. "No one is armed." "No one is threatening anyone," Melissa scoffed. "That's not what it looked like to me." One of the officers raised a hand slightly, signaling her to step back. She didn't. She hovered, eyes bright, lips pressed together in something dangerously close to satisfaction. This was it. This was the moment where everything balanced on a knife edge. If someone misunderstood a movement, if someone spoke out of turn, if one officer decided to treat this like a worst-case scenario instead of listening, I felt sick thinking about how easily this could spiral. "Sir," the officer said to me, "how many people are inside?" "Just friends," I replied. "They're calm. They're cooperating." Melissa laughed under her breath. "They sure got quiet fast." The officers didn't respond to that. They were watching, assessing. One of them took a step closer to the garage, eyes narrowing slightly as he focused on the faces inside. I noticed it before he said anything. The shift, the hesitation, the second look. Melissa didn't notice. She was too busy angling her phone, whispering something about documentation, and finally doing something about this. Another patrol car pulled up behind the first two. The street was lit up now, red and blue washing over manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Porch doors opened. Neighbors stepped outside, drawn by the noise. Melissa straightened her shoulders, soaking it in. This was the scene she wanted. Authority, attention, control. She didn't know yet that her story was about to fall apart. But standing there, with officers tense and neighbors watching and sirens still echoing in my ears, I knew one thing for certain. This was the most dangerous moment of the entire night. The officers moved with practiced caution, spreading out just enough to cover angles without escalating. One stood near the driveway, another closer to the curb, and a third took slow steps toward the garage. Their voices were calm but firm, the kind of tone that leaves no room for debate. "Everyone inside the garage, keep your hands visible," one of them called out. No sudden movements. Inside, every single person complied instantly. Hands came up. No one argued. No one hesitated. Chairs scraped softly as people adjusted their stance, deliberately slow, deliberately visible. From the outside, it probably looked unnaturally orderly, and for a brief, terrifying second, I worried that even that could be misread. The officer closest to the garage leaned slightly to get a clearer view. His eyes moved from face to face, scanning the group. I saw his expression change, just a fraction, not alarm. Confusion, then recognition. He stopped walking. His hand eased away from his belt as he stared into the garage. "Daniel," he said cautiously. Daniel Brooks didn't move his hands, but he nodded once. "Hey, Jake." The effect was immediate and almost unreal. The officer's shoulders dropped. The tension that had been wound tight across his body loosened like a cord snapping. "Wait," another officer said, stepping closer and squinting into the garage. "Hannah? Is that you?" Hannah Reyes gave a small, careful smile. "Yeah, off duty." A third officer leaned in, eyes widening slightly. "And Mark Liu?" Mark nodded. "Evening." Names passed between uniforms like a secret handshake. Radios crackled. Someone quietly muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." The posture of every responding officer shifted from threat assessment to disbelief in the span of seconds. One of them keyed his radio. "Dispatch, be advised. Subjects are confirmed off-duty law enforcement. No weapons visible. No threat present." The reply came back almost instantly, tinny but clear. "Copy. False alarm. Stand down." Just like that, the air changed. Commands softened. Hands were lowered slowly, carefully. A few quiet exhalations rippled through the group, like everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it. I felt my knees weaken, relief crashing over me so hard I had to brace myself against the side of my car. Melissa, on the other hand, looked completely lost. She stepped forward, phone still raised. "What's going on?" she demanded. "Why are you all just standing around?" One of the officers turned to her, his expression flat. "Ma'am, these individuals are off-duty police officers." Her smile froze. "That's not possible," she said quickly. "They look suspicious." The officer tilted his head slightly. "They looked like what?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since she walked onto my driveway, she didn't have an answer ready. Around us, neighbors had gathered at the ends of their driveways, drawn out by the lights and noise. A few of them were recording now too, phones raised, but this time the cameras weren't pointed at my garage. Melissa's phone dipped a few inches. Another officer spoke up, his tone sharper now. "Ma'am, did you report that these individuals might be armed?" "Yes," she said defensively. "I was being cautious. Did you see any weapons?" "No, but you told dispatch you believed there were weapons present," he pressed. She crossed her arms. I felt unsafe. The officer nodded slowly, then turned back to his radio. "Dispatch, confirm caller details." As they waited, Melissa's confidence visibly drained. She glanced around, eyes darting from officer to officer, then to the neighbors watching in silence. The power she'd been feeding on moments earlier had evaporated, leaving her exposed and scrambling. The response came through. The officer listened, then looked directly at her. "Ma'am, this is not the first time you've made an exaggerated emergency report from this address range." "What?" she snapped. "That's ridiculous." "It's noted," he said evenly. Multiple calls flagged as unsubstantiated. A murmur ran through the small crowd of neighbors. Someone whispered something I couldn't make out, but the shift was palpable. This wasn't just about tonight anymore. The senior officer, who had arrived quietly during the exchange, stepped forward. "Calling 911 based on assumptions can be dangerous," he said. "Tonight could have gone very differently." Melissa laughed nervously. "I was just doing my duty as an HOA board member." He didn't react to that. "HOA concerns are civil matters," he replied. "They are not emergency situations." She looked around, searching for support, but no one spoke. Not one neighbor stepped forward. The street was silent except for the hum of idling engines. The senior officer turned to me. "Sir, do you want to file a report for harassment or false reporting?" Melissa's phone slipped from her fingers and hit the pavement with a sharp crack. I didn't answer right away. I was still processing how close we had come to disaster, how easily this could have ended in tragedy because one person wanted control and attention. Behind me, Daniel rested a hand lightly on my shoulder. Take your time, he said quietly. Melissa stared at the broken screen of her phone, then back up at the officers. For the first time all night, she looked small. The narrative she had tried to write had been ripped out of her hands, and there was no way to spin it back. The senior officer stepped forward with the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command attention. He was older than the others, calm in a way that came from having seen situations go wrong too many times. He didn't look at my garage first. He looked directly at Melissa. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I need you to explain, in your own words, why you called 911 tonight." Melissa straightened her back, clearly trying to recover whatever authority she still thought she had. "I felt unsafe," she said. There was a large gathering of men, alcohol. They stopped what they were doing when I started recording. That behavior raised concerns. The officer nodded slowly, like he was checking boxes in his head. "Did you see any weapons?" "No," she said quickly, "but I assumed." He raised a hand gently. "Let's stop there. You assumed." She hesitated. "Yes, I assumed there could be weapons." "Based on what?" he asked. "They were watching the street," she said, grasping for something solid. "They were acting guarded." "Were they threatening you?" he asked. "No." "Did anyone approach you aggressively?" "No." "Did anyone tell you to leave?" "No." The silence after that answer stretched uncomfortably long. A few neighbors shifted on their driveways. Someone across the street lifted their phone higher, recording openly now. The officer nodded once, then turned slightly toward one of the responding officers. "Pull her call history," Melissa scoffed. "This is ridiculous. I'm on the HOA board. I have a responsibility to keep the neighborhood safe." The senior officer didn't respond to that. He simply waited. The responding officer looked down at a tablet, scrolling. His expression changed subtly, the way it had earlier in the garage. "Sir," he said, "there are multiple calls logged from this number over the past year." Melissa's face tightened. "So what? I'm vigilant." "Noise complaints escalated to emergency calls," the officer continued. "Suspicious vehicle reports that were unfounded. A welfare check requested on a neighbor who was later confirmed to be out of town. A report of possible illegal activity involving gardening equipment." A murmur rippled through the small crowd of neighbors. A few heads turned toward Melissa, expressions shifting from curiosity to recognition. The senior officer turned back to her. "Ma'am, this indicates a pattern." She laughed sharply, but it sounded thin. "You're twisting things." I was concerned. "That's not a crime." "No," he said calmly, "but misusing emergency services is." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around as if expecting someone to step in on her behalf. No one did. The neighbors who had spent years avoiding her gaze were suddenly very interested in what was happening. Phones were out everywhere now, pointed in her direction. Not aggressively, not mockingly. Just documenting. The senior officer continued, his voice steady. "Tonight you reported a group of individuals as potentially armed and dangerous without evidence. That response brings officers in ready for the worst-case scenario. People get hurt that way." "I didn't mean," she started. "Intent doesn't change outcome," he replied. "Assumptions like that can cost lives." The words hit harder than anything else had. I saw it in her face. For the first time, the seriousness of what she'd done seemed to break through her defensive shell. Her shoulders sagged slightly. He pulled out a small notepad and began writing. "I am formally documenting this incident as a false emergency report," he said. "This will be entered into the system." Melissa shook her head, panic creeping in. "You can't do that." This was an HOA issue. He looked up at her. HOA issues are civil matters. They do not justify emergency calls. Using 911 as an enforcement tool is unacceptable. One of the neighbors spoke up quietly from across the street. "She's done this before," a man said, "not just tonight." Another voice joined in. "She films people all the time." The senior officer raised a hand, acknowledging them. If anyone here has experienced similar behavior, you are encouraged to document it and file complaints through the proper channels. Melissa's authority didn't just crack. It collapsed. The woman who had spent years controlling the neighborhood through fear and vague threats stood in the middle of the street, surrounded by flashing lights and recording phones, with no power left to wield. Her HOA title meant nothing here. Her usual language didn't work. Safety had become accountability. She tried one last time. "I was just trying to help." The senior officer closed his notepad. "Help doesn't look like this." He turned to me. "Sir, you are within your rights to file a formal complaint for harassment and false reporting. I recommend you do so." I nodded slowly. My hands were still shaking, but my voice was steady. "I will." Melissa's eyes widened. "Evan, you don't need to do that." I met her gaze. "You didn't need to call 911. That was it. No shouting, no insults. Just truth." The officers began to clear the scene, their movements relaxed now. The danger had passed, but the consequences hadn't. Melissa stood there as neighbors quietly dispersed, whispering to one another, no longer afraid to speak. For the first time since I'd lived in Willow Ridge Estates, the power balance had shifted, and everyone saw it happen. The officers didn't leave all at once. There was no dramatic exit, no final lecture shouted across the street. Just quiet professionalism. Radios were clipped back in place. A few final notes were taken. Engines started, one by one, until the flashing lights faded and Willow Ridge Estates slid back into darkness. The silence afterward felt unreal. Neighbors lingered for a moment, standing in their driveways like they were unsure whether it was safe to move again. A few nodded at me. One woman mouthed, "I'm sorry." Another gave a small thumbs up before heading back inside. No one looked at Melissa. She had already retreated toward her house, shoulders hunched, phone clutched tight to her chest, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. Inside my garage, no one spoke for a full minute. Then Daniel let out a slow breath and said, "Well, that could have gone a lot worse." Someone laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because the tension finally had somewhere to go. We didn't restart the music. We didn't turn the gathering back into what it had been. We just sat down. Drinks were replaced with water. Conversations stayed low and reflective. The night wound down naturally, like everyone understood it needed to end gently. Before they left, Daniel shook my hand and looked me in the eye. "You handled that right," he said. "Most people panic." I didn't feel calm, I admitted. He smiled slightly. "You were." After the last car pulled away, I stood alone in my driveway for a while, listening to the quiet. My house looked the same as it had hours earlier. Same lights, same lawn, same garage, but something fundamental had shifted. The next few weeks proved that. It started small. A neighbor stopped me while I was checking my mail and told me about a time Melissa had filmed her teenage son for skateboarding too close to the sidewalk. Another mentioned being threatened with police over a misplaced trash bin. Someone else admitted they had received a warning letter that had never actually come from the HOA at all. Stories poured out once people realized they weren't alone. I filed my report exactly as the senior officer recommended. Dates, times, screenshots from the HOA group chat, descriptions of her behavior. No exaggeration. Just facts. I didn't rant. I didn't threaten. I documented. Others did the same. The HOA board went quiet. No newsletters. No warnings. No public shaming posts. The usual stream of passive-aggressive emails dried up almost overnight. When the next board meeting was announced, it was standing room only. Melissa didn't show. A week later, a brief email went out to the neighborhood. It stated that Melissa Crane had stepped down from her position effective immediately and that the board was reviewing community enforcement procedures. That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just absence. People talked anyway. The woman who once ruled Willow Ridge through fear and vague threats suddenly had no platform, no title, no authority. Without the borrowed power of the HOA and emergency services, she was just another neighbor. And without fear propping her up, she had nothing left to stand on. The changes that followed were subtle but powerful. The group chat softened. Neighbors spoke up. People stopped apologizing for existing. Kids played outside again without parents worrying about being filmed. Garage doors stayed open a little longer. Lawn chairs appeared on porches. The HOA backed off entirely. Rules were still rules, but enforcement became reasonable, human, proportional. No one cheered. No one celebrated. There was no victory lamp, just peace. One evening, weeks later, Ryan and I sat in the garage again. No lights, no cooler, just two chairs and quiet conversation. He looked around and said, "Feels different, doesn't it?" "It does," I said. What struck me most was how little it took to break the cycle. Not revenge, not yelling, not lawsuits, just truth, documented and shared in the open. Melissa didn't lose because someone fought dirty. She lost because her behavior couldn't survive the light once people stopped looking away. And that, more than anything, changed the neighborhood for good. Looking back, what stays with me isn't the flashing lights or the sirens or even how close everything came to going wrong. It's how easily authority can turn into bullying when no one questions it. For years, one person in our neighborhood used fear as a shortcut. She borrowed power from rules, titles, and emergency systems, and people let it happen because pushing back felt harder than staying quiet. I was one of those people. That night taught me something important. You don't dismantle fear by screaming louder or playing dirtier. You dismantle it by staying calm, telling the truth, and writing things down. Documentation isn't dramatic. It isn't satisfying in the moment, but it's powerful because it doesn't rely on emotion. It relies on reality. What finally stopped the behavior wasn't revenge or humiliation. It was exposure. Once the pattern was visible, once other people realized they weren't alone, the power evaporated. Fear only works in isolation. It doesn't survive daylight. There's a strange relief that comes after something like that. Not joy, exactly. More like clarity. Knowing where you stand. Knowing you don't have to shrink to keep the peace. Knowing that accountability exists, even in places where it feels like it never will. Willow Ridge didn't become perfect overnight, but it became human again. And that's more than I ever expected when I bought that house. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?